Heaven has been watching you from that location, as God says to my beloved soul. This message finds you in the quiet space where your heart rests after giving everything it has. There are loud and visible loves, and then there are silent, loyal, enduring loves that are so pure that even the unseen realms take notice. Your soul remembered a love for your soulmate that the world had not given you. You didn't enjoy the act of possessing. You were particularly fond of safeguarding. You didn't like exercising control. You were fond of comprehending. You did not love in order to avoid loneliness. You were in love because your spirit recognized the presence of another spirit. This type of love is not overlooked, both on earth and in heaven. This is why the title of your journey is so important. Heaven was taken aback by how you honored yourself while loving them, rather than the depth of your affection for them. With love, you bore responsibility, my beloved soul. You remained composed while transporting it. You carefully transported it. You knew when to be silent, when to step back, when to give space, and when to simply hold the energy of love without expecting a response, even when your heart desired to speak louder. This isn't the typical kind of love. That is love that was consciously chosen. Many people appreciate situations that are straightforward, reassuring, and memorable. You chose dignity over desperation, and you loved in silence, waiting, and uncertainty. Heaven does not see love as just words or assurances. It defines love as a state of alignment, and your alignment remains intact even as your heart trembles. This is why your name echoed in places where you couldn't hear it. You were chosen not because your path was easy, but because your soul could handle depth without becoming bitter. When you were misunderstood, you did not become rigid. The fact that you were not selected right away did not make you cold. When your devotion was called into question, you avoided seeking retribution. In contrast, you chose grace. You chose emotional maturity. You chose to process your pain in silence rather than performing it to gain validation. That is uncommon, my dear soul. Heaven is unimpressed by the extent of suffering. It is moved by quiet endurance, and your endurance carries love without sacrificing self-respect, which even angels admire. You cherished your soulmate without trying to shape them to fit your expectations. You saw them as they were, with their flaws, confusion, fears, and incomplete healing, and you treated them with kindness. You did not speed up their development. You did not publicly humiliate them because of their tardiness. You didn't put any pressure on them to wake. Instead, you kept your position. Many people are unfamiliar with this type of love because of the lack of constraints. It comes with the prospect of freedom, which can be frightening for those who are still learning how to remain. However, you did not abandon your affection simply because it was not fully understood. You allowed it to exist without constraints, while also maintaining your own internal equilibrium. Heaven, my beloved soul, has witnessed your unwavering self-sufficiency in the face of profound love. You followed your intuition's advice to take a break. Despite your heart's desire to transcend them, you remained within your boundaries. You avoided situations that might have lowered your self-esteem. You chose silence over arguments. You chose prayer over a reaction. You chose faith over fear. As a result, your affection became a testimony. Not all people are chosen to love in this way, as it requires strength rather than weakness. It requires an awareness of one's own identity rather than absorption in another. There were nights when you had inner conversations that you never expressed aloud. Nights when you inquired about the universe but did not demand answers. Nights when you gave up control and relied on timing instead. Heaven heard those unspoken prayers. Heaven noted your request for alignment rather than possession. You did not implore them to choose you. You requested the truth. You asked for an explanation of the intended meaning. You sought clarification, regardless of whether it meant relinquishing control. My dear soul, that request alone sets you apart from many others. Your commitment to the outcome was non-existent. You were dedicated to upholding the highest level of integrity. You cherished your soulmate without attempting to rescue them, because you understood that healing cannot be coerced. You didn't become their savior. You continued to be their reflection. You displayed emotional depth, calmness, and honesty. You helped them perceive themselves by treating them with respect and without lecturing or pressuring them. That is a divine way of loving. Heaven was taken aback by the outpouring of love, which is usually reserved for the highest levels of existence. Nonetheless, you carried it in human form. You maintained a balance between emotion and sagacity. You achieved a harmonious balance of awareness and affection. You achieved a harmonious balance of optimism and realism. My dear soul, you were chosen because you understood that love does not require the loss of one's identity. You realized that love does not require the acceptance of disrespect. You realized that love does not necessitate the loss of one's tranquility. As a result, you retreated with dignity when the circumstances demanded a test of your worth. You did not experience a collapse. You refrained from pursuing. You did not cause the chaos. You were confident that the aligned path would never require your soul's abandonment. That level of confidence is extremely uncommon. That trust is sacred. That trust is what made heaven more receptive to your story. You may not be aware of it, but the way you loved shifted timelines and softened hearts. It planted seeds of awareness in previously closed areas. Your soulmate's soul recognized your love, even if they didn't fully understand it at the time. Souls consistently recognize what is genuine. Even when the mind is perplexed, your love provides a solid foundation, a standard, a quiet memory that they will treasure when they are ready to love with the same intensity. Heaven was not surprised by the allure of romance. I was taken aback by the magnitude of the obligation. Your love was free from ego. Love was not contingent on performance. You loved without considering your own well-being. My dear soul, your journey is not about expressing love. It is related to its embodiment. To experience love in its most pure form, you were never meant to beg to be chosen because you had already been chosen by the divine. Your soul is unaffected by regret, whether the path continues or evolves into something more profound. You completed your purpose for visiting this location. You were sincere in your affection. You consciously loved. You showed courage in your love. Heaven acknowledges this. This is just the beginning of your story. Because those who are chosen do not suffer the loss of love. They elevate it. And as we progress, you will understand why your heart is being trained through patience. Why heaven entrusted you with a love few can handle, and why your silence was powerful. My dear soul, there is a sacred quality to the way you continued to love in the face of uncertainty. Heaven kept a close eye on that region. You were in a situation in which many people would have sought clarification, labels, or assurance. Nevertheless, you chose comprehension over pressure. You realized that true love does not hasten the awakening of another soul. You respected the timing, even though your heart was ready for it long before the circumstances aligned. Patience was not a problem. Wisdom was derived from self-awareness. You were aware that imposing love generates resistance, whereas allowing love to flourish produces truth. Heaven noticed your ability to balance hope with reality, desire with dignity, and longing with restraint. That equilibrium is what distinguishes you as the chosen one. You were deeply moved, my dear soul, but you never allowed emotion to become disordered. When you became confused, your focus was on yourself rather than others. Instead of reacting, you engaged in introspection. You processed silently. Rather than projecting pain, this inner discipline is uncommon because most people project their wounds onto others. You handled it with great care. You refrained from using love as a bargaining chip. Additionally, silence was not used as a form of punishment. Your silence was sacred, a way of listening to both the divine and your heart. Heaven recognized that silence is a source of strength, not its absence. There were times when your heart desired to inquire, elucidate, and substantiate the feeling that was so clear within you. Another higher power compelled you to take a moment. You were confident that a genuine connection would not require endless explanations. You were confident that the intended outcome would be achieved without the use of force. That trust was not won easily. It was built on emotional maturity, self-esteem, and a deep understanding of one's own worth. You did not confuse intimacy and intensity. You understand that intimacy develops in a safe environment rather than in an urgent situation. Heaven observed how you protected the connection by refraining from overpowering it. You, my dear soul, also protected yourself. That is the reason your love was so strong. You didn't put up with emotional inconsistency just to stay connected. You did not give up your principles in order to be selected. You observed patterns. You observed the behavior. You preferred to listen to energy rather than excuses. And when something didn't feel right, you avoided attempting to fix it. That retreat did not lead to rejection. It was respect for the other soul's process as well as your own. Heaven respects those who understand the proper time to hold and release. You understood that love cannot flourish in an environment dominated by fear. As a result, you chose tranquility. You chose a presence that was grounded in reality. You chose to present yourself in an authentic manner, without any disguises. You did not play games to keep your attention. You did not withhold affection to gain control. Despite fluctuations on the other side, you remained consistent. Heaven was astounded by that consistency. Because consistent love requires emotional stability. Furthermore, emotional balance necessitates internal healing. You finished the task quietly, without the need for validation, applause, or being observed. You loved in a way that allowed the other person to be human, my dear soul. You avoided idealizing them outside of reality. You didn't place them on a pedestal that would eventually collapse. You were able to discern both the light and the shadow, but you ultimately chose compassion. You understood that confusion does not always indicate a lack of emotion. Occasionally, it refers to unresolved wounds. However, you also recognized that compassion does not imply self-neglect. That understanding represents highly developed soul wisdom. Heaven only gives such knowledge to those who are willing to use it responsibly. Some days, the distance felt more oppressive than the proximity. When the presence of unresolved energy raises questions in your mind. Nonetheless, you did not enter a downward spiral. You didn't make an assumption. You created an opportunity for the truth to be revealed. You gave me the opportunity to express my thoughts. You believed that what was genuine would last, while anything false would dissipate naturally. Most people achieve that level of emotional regulation over many lifetimes. You carried it instinctively, as if your soul had remembered it. Heaven acknowledged the recollection. You have never attempted to replace yourself in order to maintain relevance. You never toned down the intensity of your light to keep the shadows of others from intimidating you. You continue to demonstrate emotional intelligence, intuition, and stability. You refrained from seeking reassurance because you had already met your own needs. You did not plead for selection because you were already aware of your worth. Self-awareness generates a frequency to which heaven responds. A soul is self-aware and doesn't need external confirmation. That is an indication that the individual has been chosen for more advanced love lessons. No, my dear soul, you refused to allow bitterness to enter your heart, even when love appeared to be incomplete. There was no malice in your speech. You did not ruin the relationship with resentment. You chose neutrality and grace. You understood that certain connections are not meant to be forced into existence, but rather to be celebrated for the awakening they bring. You demonstrated respect for the lessons by not obsessing over the outcome. The surrender created a stir in the heavens. Surrender is not synonymous with abandonment. It is a belief in divine orchestration that goes beyond human comprehension. You cherished your soulmate in a way that encouraged growth rather than dependence. You wanted them to be intact, not attached. You wanted their recovery, not their dependence. That intention alone elevates a relationship above the level of ordinary romance. It becomes a form of spiritual labor. It transforms into spiritual alignment. Heaven accepted your love as service, not as a form of sacrifice. Love did not make you lose your identity. You improved as a result of it. This is why your path is guarded. My beloved soul, the quiet choices you made, the restraint you exercised, and the respect you demonstrated all had far-reaching consequences, even when things appeared uncertain. Your emotions did not surprise heaven. I was surprised by your emotional intelligence. I was astounded by your ability to love without losing clarity. The refusal to abandon oneself in favor of attachment was shocking. Remember this as you move forward. Your love was not unnoticed, and your story is still unfolding. However, the significance of the goods you transported is only now beginning to be understood. This is because chosen individuals do not have the opportunity to experience love, which can lead to its destruction. They experience love in order to become more aligned with their authentic selves. My dear soul, a subtle transformation occurs when love is no longer an expectation, but rather a state of consciousness that one carries. You entered that transformation without realizing when it began. It began when you stopped trying to figure out why things happened, and instead focused on the transformation of your inner world. Paisin, love has not abandoned you. It took on a new form, and you were mature enough to accept it without objection. When love undergoes a transformation, many hearts become anxious. However, yours has developed the ability to remain open without adhering. This capability alone indicates that the soul has spent many lifetimes developing the ability to love without losing its identity. You noticed that your emotions were no longer causing you to behave in an extreme way. You were able to recall information without any discomfort. It was detectable without having to submerge oneself. You could be concerned without needing to pursue. This equilibrium was not accidental, my dearest soul. It was developed through self-awareness, reflection, and restraint. You allowed yourself to mourn the uncertain without attributing it to failure. You allowed yourself to miss without turning it into an act of self-betrayal. That is not the lesson that the world teaches. That wisdom comes from within, from a soul that understands timing rather than attachment. There were times when silence replaced communication, and you learned to understand it rather than fear it. You realized that silence is not always synonymous with absence. Processing is occasionally an issue. It occasionally acts as a safeguard. It can sometimes act as a mirror, revealing things that words cannot. You refrained from making assumptions during the silence. You did not use it as a weapon of resentment. You simply observed it. That observation fortified you. You have evolved into a person who responds rather than reacts, who listens beyond the sound of a voice. My beloved soul, you have also become aware of the extent to which you value emotional security. You realized that love should cause the body to feel calm rather than anxious. It must be a sense of stability rather than one of instability. Furthermore, you stopped ignoring the signal when it repeatedly disrupted your peace. You paid tribute to it. Your boundaries were not emphasized. There was no announcement regarding your withdrawal. You simply adjusted your energy. The quiet adjustment was an act of self-respect. Self-respect is one of the most pure forms of love. You began to understand the depth of your dedication without ever keeping a score. You cherished it without considering the benefits. You arrived without assurances. However, you did not feel depleted. Instead, you felt a sense of expansion. That is how you knew your affection was genuine. Genuine love does not deplete the soul. It reveals it. Although the outcome is uncertain, genuine love imparts wisdom rather than bitterness. You have consistently opted for wisdom. Nobody else will ever know about the internal conversations you had with yourself. Conversations where you chose not to send a text. Conversations in which you refused to give an explanation. Conversations in which you chose patience over impulse. Each of these instances strengthened your internal authority. You gave up your pursuit of permission to express your emotions. You stopped questioning your intuition. You have faith in yourself. That trust served as your foundation. Yes, my dear soul, you understand that not all profound connections are meant to last in their current form indefinitely. Certain connections stimulate aspects of your personality that require independent development. This was not viewed as a loss by you. In your opinion, it represented evolution. You allowed love to teach you rather than entice you. You allowed memory to exist without turning it into yearning. You allowed the heart to stay soft without becoming attached. This is the process of emotional alchemy. You became more involved in your own life. You laughed without feeling bad. You felt at ease. You maintained your concentration without being interrupted. You stopped thinking about other people's emotions and instead focused on your own. That change restored your power, not over others, but within yourself. That is the only source of power that endures. My beloved soul, you discovered that being chosen does not imply being held. Occasionally, it entails being willing to accept what aligns with your core rather than challenging it, discern more clearly, and love more deeply. You stopped romanticizing effort that was not reciprocated on the same level. You stopped using the term potential inconsistencies. This clarity did not chill you. It promotes a sense of calm. You also observed that compassion and boundaries can coexist. It is possible to understand another person's wounds without becoming the site of their bleeding. You could provide care without having to carry. You can empathize without absorbing. That is an uncommon level of emotional maturity. Empathy is no longer equated with obligation. You realized that love must be mutual in order to last. On occasion, the memory of your deep love would surface, not to undermine your resolve, but to serve as a reminder of your own abilities. Instead of feeling uncomfortable, you smiled. Temol, you felt proud rather than remorseful. You realized that the way you loved was never cause for shame. It was a reflection of your emotional intelligence, courage, and depth. Everyone who comes into contact with you, whether they realize it or not, carries your imprint. You, my dear soul, became accustomed to the narrative's uncertain conclusion. You ceased to enforce closure. You stopped requiring certainty. You believed that once you stopped pursuing clarity, it would manifest itself. The surrender was not passive. It had a solid foundation. You continued to live life to the fullest, intentionally loving yourself and remaining true to your values. You did not postpone your life in anticipation of someone else's decision. You realized that your heart isn't brittle. It is tenacious. It can bend, but does not break. It is not collapsing, despite appearances. It adores, but it does not disappear. That realization altered how you perceived yourself. You are no longer concerned about profound love because you are confident in your ability to remain calm in the face of any consequence. My beloved soul, the way you kept this connection, the way you respected it without attachment, and the way you respected yourself without withdrawal, all contributed to your growth as a person who loves from a place of completeness. You are no longer defined by what was once uncertain. You are defined by who you became as a result of it, and that version of yourself is deeply aligned, aware, and stable. You were not killed by this love. It refined you, which is why your journey continues with grace, as hearts like yours are not designed to lose love. It is intended that they go through a transformation and come out with more clarity, strength, and a deeper connection to the truth. As you continued to progress, my dear soul, a subtle yet powerful transformation began to take place within you. You no longer carried the weight of explanation. You no longer felt compelled to justify your emotions, pace, or boundaries. You realized that people who truly understand you don't need constant clarification, whereas those who don't understand you will misunderstand even your most elaborate explanations. This realization freed up your energy because you no longer had to expend emotional currency in order to be understood. You chose to maintain your authenticity, composure, and connection to the truth. You noticed that your inner world became calmer, not empty, but more composed. Thoughts were no longer racing. Emotions no longer required immediate release. Everything began to operate in accordance with its natural rhythm. My beloved soul, this was not detachment. This was a regulation. You learned to sit alone without distractions. You learned to experience emotions without acting. That tranquility served as your refuge. That sanctuary helped to refine your perception even further. You became more aware of patterns in not only others, but also in yourself. You observed the stimuli that triggered your emotions and the factors that provided you with relief. You noticed what drained you and what rejuvenated you. You stopped ignoring discomfort in order to maintain your connection. You stopped suppressing your body's signals in order to maintain emotional equilibrium. Instead, you chose internal tranquility. That decision completely altered your relationship with love. Oh, my dear soul, You also realized that you had deep respect for the other person's humanity. You never demanded perfection. You never imagined they'd arrive completely healed. Oh, you approached them without any pressure or judgment. However, you now have a critical understanding. Meeting someone at their current level does not imply staying at that level if it impedes your personal development. You discovered that love can be compassionate without being selfless. That lesson was smoothly integrated, with no bitterness. You grew accustomed to allowing space without fear of abandonment. Space was no longer considered a form of rejection. It was a sense of clarity. It gave you the opportunity to pause, reflect, and reorient. You stopped occupying space with anxiety. You stopped interpreting distance as a lack of concern. You allowed reality to speak for itself. In doing so, you regained emotional balance. Neutrality is effective because of its ability to dispel illusions. It presents the facts as they are, rather than how you want them to be. There were times when your heart recognized how much you had matured as a result of this relationship. You did not feel inferior because you had experienced deep love. You felt a sense of expansion. You gained wisdom. You felt more stable in terms of your emotional requirements. You no longer considered intensity to be equal to depth. You no longer confuse connection and yearning. You understood that depth is a feeling of security, not anxiety. That realization quietly but firmly altered your expectations. You have also stopped romanticizing emotional pain, my dear soul. You no longer believe that love has to be painful to be significant. You no longer believe that patience entails acceptance of inconsistency. You understood that genuine patience requires self-control, the ability to walk away from situations that cause you confusion, the ability to wait for what is in alignment. This understanding provided solace. Loving starts to feel like a force that stabilizes your nervous system, not one that undermines it. You became more selective about how you used your emotional energy. It wasn't because you chose to close your heart. It was because you valued it. You discovered that availability is extremely important. You discovered that not everyone is worthy of your depth. You discovered that discernment is not synonymous with judgment. It is self-respect. Your presence became more deliberate, grounded, and composed as a result of your self-respect. My beloved soul, you have also given up the desire to demonstrate the genuineness of your affection. Validation is no longer required. You were aware of the services that you offered. You were aware of your appearance. You were aware that your intentions were pure. You felt at ease as a result of that knowledge. You stopped reliving events in your mind. You stopped wondering whether you had accomplished enough or too much. You were confident that the item would reach the intended recipient. Furthermore, it was never your responsibility to coerce anything that wasn't ready for reception. Even in silence, you became aware of the effects of your energy on others. You realized that your emotional consistency creates a sense of security, that your calm demeanor is more persuasive than words, and that your consistency has a lasting effect. It was unnecessary for you to state your worth. It had a sensation. This realization did not inflate your ego. You were humbled by this. It served as a reminder to be gentle with oneself and others. Occasionally, the idea of the connection would return in a gentle, painless way. The sensation was one of quiet acknowledgement rather than longing. Rather than sighing, you smiled. You felt gratitude rather than an ache. You understood that while certain connections are not physically present, They have a long-term impact on your development. The imprint in question did not indicate a wound. It acted as a marker of evolution. You also became less reactive to uncertainty, my dear soul. You no longer needed immediate responses. Clarity was no longer your goal. You believed that clarity would emerge once you stopped demanding it. This trust allows you to stay engaged in your life. You invested in your own development. You fostered your habits. You fortified your internal structures. Love becomes an element that enriches your life rather than defining it. You noticed that your emotional realm appeared to be larger. It is possible to hold multiple truths simultaneously. It is possible to acknowledge a connection without developing an attachment. You were capable of expressing compassion without expectation. You could remember without feeling nostalgic. This emotional spaciousness allowed you to breathe more freely. It allowed you to live your life free of the constant tug of what-ifs. You kept a sense of reality. My dear soul, you came to the realization that being chosen does not always result in union. It occasionally appears to be a method of preparation. Preparation for the reception of love that is appropriate for your current situation rather than your past. Prepare to recognize consistency when it exists. Preparation to recognize mutual effort without going overboard. You did not speed up this preparation. You put your faith in it. You continued to move forward with an open yet guarded heart.
Please, chosen one, refrain from proceeding, scrolling, or averting your gaze. If you leave in the next few seconds, you will miss out on an unforgettable moment. What you're about to hear is not information. No, this is a warning specific to this moment in time. Furthermore, the fact that you are hearing it is no coincidence. Pay close attention. Additionally, stay in your current location. The reason for the recent intensity of loneliness is due to the information I am about to reveal. For what reason? No one arrived when you most needed it. What was the reason for the complete stillness, and why did it not indicate abandonment? It was a far more deliberate action. A product that has been specifically designed to target you. Oh, an event occurred 96 hours ago that has never happened in the 4,000-year history of humanity. Not through a messenger, nor through an apparition. Celestial records express God's genuine surprise. And the event that triggered it was not public. It was neither commemorated or observed. It was an independent action that you carried out. Support is unavailable. Complete lack of recognition. No one is encouraging you. No one was aware of what you were transporting. The following is the truth that will break down the story you've been telling yourself about why your journey has been so isolating. There are people who are chosen and continually supported. In addition, some people are chosen to face all challenges on their own. There is no rescue. Absence of reinforcement. There is no assurance. You were assigned to the second path, not as a consequence of your failure. This is not because you were overlooked. However, the transformation you are experiencing is not possible through any other means. The majority of people are unaware of the distinction. They assume that loneliness is synonymous with rejection. They believe that their silence indicates that they were overlooked. However, that assumption masks an even more concerning reality. There is a reason why the door opened for you. Furthermore, there was a reason for the event's isolation. The reason for this has yet to be disclosed. Only those who survive will understand why the exact moment occurred. Please refrain from departing. Not at this time. The information about to be revealed has been purposefully concealed, buried in silence. Because if the chosen individuals realized the true weight of the burden they carried alone, they would never see themselves the same way again. It was never intended that you assess your journey through the lens of applause or witnesses. The events you witnessed were beyond the scope of human understanding. This is precisely why it was significant. Continue like this until the end. Because your battle was unambiguous. It was not a figment of our imagination. A particular conflict occurred. A precise moment when all pressure increased and no one stood by your side. It was obvious to heaven. God acknowledged the situation, not just because of your distress. Nonetheless, the fortitude that rose within you when help was unavailable. Others would have surrendered. The rescue of others would have been requested. You remained. You persevered. The weight of that endurance has not yet been revealed to you. Scripture conveys what few understand. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted. From a distance, proximity does not equate to comfort. It is a presence that has been shaped by hardship. Despite your belief that you were invisible, you were being purposefully identified. Something was being established that could not be undone while you thought you were just surviving. This did not start yesterday. You barely recognize yourself from a season that occurred months ago. That was the point of intersection. The place where a task was completed in silence. And the consequences of such a victory are never minor. Nothing has been said about you yet. The consequences of your refusal to surrender are yet to be determined. But it's already started to move. And if you persevere, you will eventually realize the importance of walking that section alone. The change in your life was so subtle that you initially questioned your own abilities. Individuals who were previously close together began to disperse for no apparent reason. Messages that had previously been quickly responded to were met with indifference. Suddenly, those who had arrived without being asked had no time, space, or margin for you. It possessed a subtle, almost imperceptible quality. But it continued to spread. This was not an example of paranoia. Sensitivity was not a factor. A genuine separation has occurred. Furthermore, it was felt more deeply because of your lack of understanding about the actions that entitle you to such treatment. Then, months later, that moment arrived. The one you can still remember with clarity. When tragedy struck, you instinctively sought help. You contacted the person who had responded to your previous inquiries. Something wasn't right when they talked. Not a condemnation. Something that is much cooler. Indifference. Your discomfort appeared to be a minor disruption to their day. You ended the call in a hollower tone than you had before. In addition to the issue at hand, you are now burdened with the shock of discovering that the support you had relied on was no longer available when it was most needed. You made another attempt. Once more. The sound of each response was distinct, but it was delivered in the same way. Preoccupied. I apologize. Not at this time. A later time. The future never materialized. You eventually came to a realization that caused you to stop breathing. There was no one in the way. The rescue was not imminent. Nobody else was going to transport it for you. That was the night you finally confronted it. Isolated. You were unable to pay. Not in silence. Not in a respectful manner. You were overwhelmed by its weight. A person was once described in the Bible as being abandoned at night until he engaged in a solo wrestling match. He changed his gait when morning arrived. You were also impacted by that evening. Because surrendering in solitude does not imply defeat. It is the point at which strength emerges, and no one else can influence it. Without help, you faced an impossibility. You couldn't run away from it. You continued to exist. And that decision altered everything. Yes, even if you weren't aware of it. Let us pause for a moment before proceeding. This is not a random occurrence. If this message seems important to you, it is because of a recent revelation. Therefore, cease. Allow yourself to be fully present by taking a moment of silence. Before we begin, I'd like you to perform an action that may appear simple, but it has profound spiritual significance and active agreement within your spirit. Initially, like this video, allow that action to become more than just a habit. Let this be a declaration. I agree with the words of God that are spoken over my existence. Second, subscribe to and stay connected to a flow of messages from heaven to keep your spirit conscious, aligned, and discerning, so you don't miss out on what's meant for you. Our goal is to have 20,000 subscribers. Third, please provide your city and country, as well as the number of inches you have in the comments, 999 or 777. Allow this to serve as a subtle but powerful symbol between you and the Lord. I am prepared. My spirit is receptive. I am receiving the truth that you are revealing. Furthermore, those who are inspired to support this ministry through prayers, comments, or the Super Thanks feature should be aware of this. You are not just donating. As a collaborator and colleague, you contribute to this sacred mission. Your assistance is not haphazard. It is oneness. It is your expression of readiness to obey your commands, Lord. I concur. This is what you were unable to see during that dark night. Isolation was not an error. Punishment was not administered. It was no coincidence that you were turned against. It was strategic, sacred, and intentional. The silent removal of all human support layers was not intended to cause you to collapse, but rather to reveal strength that you would not have discovered if someone had continued to rescue you. Heaven was attentive, not distant, and closely monitoring you while you thought you were abandoned. The events that occurred defined that moment. A chosen individual is on the verge of discovering a previously unknown capacity. As a result of the looming conflict, the majority of people could only survive with the help of reinforcement, protection, and numbers. However, you had to face it without any of that. There are no reserves. There is no barrier present. Your will alone. Just your unadulterated, unwavering belief that life was still worth protecting. The situation remained unchanged when morning arrived. The wait persisted. However, you were not identical. There was no sudden clarity, no voice, no thunder. Only a severe realization. Disappearance was the result of remaining seated. The only remaining route was up. Consequently, you relocated. It wasn't because you were confident. Not because you had the answers. You relocated because you did not have any remaining assets. You proceeded without any assurances. You made your decision without knowing for certain. You acted with the understanding that failure was possible. However, surrendering was not an option. In that instant, an entity that transcended thought and terror refused to give up control. That refusal did not indicate intransigence. It was an awakening to one's identity. And once that awakening occurs, nothing remains the same. Section 5. Independently progressing. Fall, rise, and then make a new decision. This is the portion that few people understand. It began to function. Not in an orderly manner. not all at once. However, this was enough to give you a glimmer of hope that you might be able to get through this on your own. As a result, you implemented an additional measure. Then another. Following that, there were numerous other instances. Each is unaided. Each person is accountable for their actions, without anyone else to rely on. There is nobody else to blame. You made a mistake. There were times when the weight was so heavy that you couldn't move at all. Nights when you urgently cried out for help, not quietly, in the hope that someone would respond. Nobody did. The same decision was made every time you encountered silence. Either stop at this point, or continue on your own. You persisted, even though it took days to regain your footing. Are you aware of how many invisible battles were necessary? The frequency with which you opposed a straightforward escape. The silent resignation, gradually dissipating. How many correct decisions did you make while your innermost being begged for mercy? This was never a single altercation. It was consistent. Days were stacked on top of each other. Hours are compressed into hours. Nobody celebrated the victory you won every time you refused to give up. No one noticed. No one expressed gratitude. No one. With the exception of God. As the Bible once said, "The eyes of the Lord ranged throughout the earth to strengthen those whose hearts are fully committed to Him." He saw everything. The passage of time happened. Weeks turned into months. And then, almost imperceptibly, something happened. You were making progress. Gradually. In a low voice. Without acknowledgement. Without reinforcement. Anyone believed you without evidence. Nonetheless, you were progressing. Not through coercion. Without using spectacles. However, with a fortitude that is unique to those who have mastered the ability to stand upright in the absence of others. Then, the moment arrived. 3 months ago. Upon convergence of all factors, you stood in front of the last barrier. The final impediment to your breakthrough. It was huge. Immobile. It was so overwhelming that for the first time in a long time, you publicly acknowledged your feelings. I am unable to comprehend this. This cannot be accomplished. And you were not mistaken. It demanded what you lacked based on any reasonable standard. Resources were missing. The skills were not completely developed. There was no help available. However, instead of giving in to the weight of the impossibility, an ancient force within you awoke. Something had been quietly developing for quite some time. This moment was influenced by every battle you fought alone. Training had been the foundation of each unobserved victory. Like David, who stepped forward without armor while others remained stationary. You relocated without authority. Without reassurance. Without reassurance. The battle is the Lord's, as Scripture once stated. However, your limbs still needed to move. And they did. You awoke with raw courage. The action was fueled by desperation. A refusal to be stopped after traveling this far independently. You persevered despite exhaustion. You pondered until your thoughts ignited. You rearranged every item in your possession. You used up all of your reserves. And just when you thought there was nothing left, more materialized. This was followed by 3 weeks of total conflict. Nights became shorter. The remainder has been ignored. The people in your vicinity noticed the change, but they were unable to identify it. Emotion was absent. The intensity defied explanation. A testament that was written under duress. A resolve that no longer questioned the viability of victory. The sole requirement was that defeat no longer be considered an option. And that's when everything started to tilt. Then something happened. 64 days ago. Nobody observed the aftermath of conflicts. Following the endurance test that should have exhausted you. After being in a position where the majority would have given up. You exceeded the limit. You emerged victorious. Not by a small margin. In its entirety. That was not a small victory. In every visible way, it was the type of victory that should not have been yours. You succeeded in overcoming a situation that normally requires force, protection, and numbers. Nonetheless, you completed the task on your own, holding your wrists steady. Your own consciousness is uncluttered. Your determination is unwavering. And when it was finally over, as the din subsided and the burden eased, there was no applause for you. The absence of crowds. Complete lack of recognition. There was no indication that the world comprehended what had happened. Only silence. You. Isolated. Accepting the reality of your recent actions. However, silence does not necessarily mean that nothing happened. You remained calm after the storm. There was some unseen movement. Previously, Scripture stated, a strong wind was present. However, the Lord did not appear in the breeze. After the fire, there was a gentle murmur. During the silence, heaven was fully awake. God had observed every moment, every single decision, each refusal to yield. And the events that occurred during that time were unusual. Without a doubt. This is not a correction. Is this possible? It wasn't because of your unexpected strength. However, due to your use of it. Unwavering determination. The determination. You continued to advance when it would have been logical to give up. God has observed the rise and fall of generations. He's previously witnessed impossible victories. However, this one stood out because of its weight. And that distinction is about to become more important than you may realize. The subsequent event is extremely rare, almost unheard of. A war of that magnitude has only been won by a select few without the assistance of allies. No reinforcement was provided. Without a single instance of human validation, you succeeded. And that victory has altered how you are now recognized by the higher realms. A council met 96 hours ago. Not symbolic. Finished. Game of Thrones. Archangels. Seraphim. The entire order has been collected. Then, an unprecedented event occurred. God revealed the full details of your conflict. This is not a summation. Not the highlights. Every autumn. Every single tear. You almost came to a halt at every opportunity, but you eventually decided to continue. They witnessed triumphs that were not acknowledged by anyone. The actions you took were not guaranteed to be effective. Decisions made with disregard for safety. The audience did not applaud. The council observed in silence. There were no words when it ended. Because they had witnessed an uncommon level of resolve, even outside of the human realm. Then God gave a statement. Additionally, every word was documented. This chosen individual accomplished what the majority of people are unable to do, even with help. He completed the task on his own. He did not simply endure. He achieved complete victory. After that declaration, an event occurred that had never happened before at a gathering of this kind. The heads of the seraphim were lowered, not included in the ritual, in acknowledgement. A boundary had been crossed. Because there are different levels among the chosen. Certain individuals have potential. Certain people develop proficiency. Some people receive assistance with completing their assignments. Then there is a completely different category. Individuals who succeed in accomplishing the impossible when all support is lost. You chose that category. Not in line with the title. Not via a public announcement. By means of evidence. By your actions when no one else was present, except for heaven itself. However, recognition was not the end. A decree was issued as a result. An order issued with the intention of changing the scale, timing, and direction. In essence, God stated that this person has demonstrated the ability to succeed on his own. Now, contemplate the consequences of his lack of obligation. Did you experience that change? The isolation was never intended to persist. It functioned as a testing ground, a fire that is used to forge. Additionally, you have successfully completed the most rigorous examination now. The events that follow will demolish every boundary that you previously believed to be the limit of your life. Due to the fact that the decree that has been issued to you has 3 potential consequences, each unfolding in its own season. Initially, new individuals will begin to enter your life within 90 days. Not in a casual way, not at random. These will be individuals who operate at a spiritual level that is distinct from that of any other individual you have encountered. Warriors. Not spectators. They will immediately identify you, not as a result of your statements. Nevertheless, due to the circumstances in which you prevailed independently, you will not conduct a search for them. You will refrain from providing an explanation. Evidence has already been presented. One by one, they will arrive. Precision fitting into the designated location. Additionally, this is the factor that unites you. Additionally, each of them encountered insurmountable obstacles in solitude. Scripture once stated that 2 individuals can defend themselves, despite the fact that one may be defeated. Those who acquire the ability to stand independently are being assembled by God. Not because they required assistance. However, they achieved partnership as a result. Also, you will be the one who carries authority among them. Secondly, the opportunity you previously pursued will resurface within 180 days. However, it will not be as you had envisioned. It will surpass it. It will be in perfect harmony with the individual you developed during your time of solitude. It will be immediately apparent to you. It is not because of chance. Nevertheless, as a deliberate design. Furthermore, there will be no scrambling upon its arrival. No feigning. You will be prepared because the battle has transformed you into the individual who is capable of receiving it. Third, there will be a moment that you are unable to keep private within the next year. What you have accomplished independently will be apparent. It is not due to your desire for recognition. However, victories of that magnitude are not concealed. Individuals who withdrew will observe the structures that were constructed without their participation. Additionally, they will experience the consequences of their failure to attend. However, you will not derive pleasure from their regret. Something within you has undergone a transformation. Compassion will endure. Nevertheless, dependence will not develop. Validation from those who have departed is no longer necessary when one achieves victory independently. You are no longer defined by their absence. Their perspectives no longer influence you. You have transcended the necessity for what they were unable to provide. The decree did not conclude with the provision of a reward. Additionally, it implemented safeguards. Due to the fact that your accomplishments are not overlooked, it induces feelings of envy. It incites opposition. It attracts the attention of individuals who were previously unimportant. Because of this, safeguards were implemented. Functioning on 3 distinct levels. The first level is automatic defense. They will begin to unravel in their own lives if they attempt to sabotage what you have constructed in isolation. It is not because you expressed your disapproval of them, not as a result of your resistance. However, the act of opposing a chosen one who has demonstrated faithfulness in solitude has its own repercussions. Self-defense is not mandatory. The safeguard is currently operational. It will be quietly apparent to you. The individuals who spoke out against you experiencing sudden instability. The plans of those who conspired in secret were exposed. The emergence of concealed intentions without your consent. This was not an accident. It is a form of protection that prevents threats from ever reaching you. The second level is directional shielding. False paths will not be accessible. Opportunities that appear appealing but would divert you from your identity will not resonate. And if one does emerge, an internal component of you will immediately reject it. Despite the fact that it appears flawless on paper, your spirit will not concur. Scripture once cautioned that even the elect could be deceived if it were feasible. The temptation to prioritize ease over purpose becomes subtle after one has survived alone, as God is aware. A few offers would make assurances of relief, but they would also steal your call. This safeguard prevents them from establishing a foothold. Clarity is the third level. Understanding will emerge from within you when decisions are significant, not as confusion or noise, but as certainty. A knowledge that surpasses logic rather than contesting it. By adhering to that inner clarity, you will avoid making errors in the most critical areas. Because one who learned to choose correctly without guidance, without reassurance, without support, has proven trustworthy. When the situation necessitates it, direct guidance is provided to foster that level of trust. This is not a gratuity. It is a reaction to the suffering you have already experienced. Additionally, the forthcoming events are currently being safeguarded. The decree contains additional information. This is the point at which comprehension begins to expand. God was not only taken aback by the ordeal you underwent. He was profoundly affected by it, even to the extent that he made an uncommon decision. Your journey would serve as a beacon for those who are still fighting in isolation. At present, there are numerous individuals who have been selected to occupy the same position as you all over the world. Isolated, unseen, and carrying battles that no one acknowledges, they wonder if they were forgotten and question whether they have enough strength left to continue without support. And God is revealing the essence of what you did without announcing your name, without revealing your face or details. They are being shown that someone endured what they are enduring and did not break through dreams, quiet impressions, or sudden knowing. That it is feasible to prevail without witnesses. Abandonment is not implied by that solitude. Your triumph has evolved into a beacon of light that you never intended to wield. A signal that is transmitted to individuals whom you will never encounter. During times when they are tempted to give up, your refusal to surrender is a source of strength for others. You did not fight solely for your own benefit. Additionally, you were unaware of the extent of your endurance. This is the magnitude of your work independently. Much more than your future, it was altered. It altered the internal environment of selected individuals worldwide. You maintained your standing, which resulted in darkness losing ground. This is why the subsequent events are of even greater significance. This is the inquiry that has been preoccupying you. Which of the numerous battles you engaged in astonished the divine? It was not the most impressive, the loudest, or the one that others could have observed. It was the most tranquil. It was the internal conflict. The altercation that no one observed. 5 months ago, the opportunity to compromise was present, and no one would have questioned your decision to enter. The simpler route was accessible, appropriate, reasonable. On your own you were. Not visible. Unrecorded. Absence of eyes. There are no repercussions. You, your conscience, and God are the only ones who matter. At that moment, you opted for integrity, despite the fact that surrender would have been of no apparent cost. Not because someone was watching, but because a part of you would not betray what it knew to be true. You did not submit to external pressure. Rather, you resisted internal weakness. That decision, which was silent and invisible, was more significant than any public victory you had achieved. When reputation is at stake, anyone has the ability to make the right decision. Everyone is capable of exhibiting positive behavior when the repercussions are evident. However, to remain faithful in the face of obscurity when no one would ever know if you were unsuccessful, that is a depth that few can achieve. That moment was observed by God. He annotated it. And the conversation that took place about you at that time was documented. Witnesses are unnecessary for this chosen individual to execute the righteous course of action. Does not necessitate affirmation to remain accurate. Does not require an audience to be who they are. Rare is the occurrence of such integrity. A response was released in recognition of that unseen victory, which is only known to you and God. This is due to the fact that actions that are undertaken in secret are not kept secret. According to the Bible, what is sown in silence will be revealed in the open. The blessing that cannot be ignored is always the result of integrity that is carried in silence. At all times, without exception. What you accomplished independently has a more sinister repercussion. It was not unnoticed in the lower realms. Fear has been incited. Because if you accomplish the impossible without assistance, resources, or support, then a single question terrifies them. What transpires subsequent to the intervention of heaven itself? That apprehension is not arbitrary. A chosen individual who is capable of achieving victory independently is already perilous. However, a chosen individual who has demonstrated their strength and subsequently receives reinforcement is uncontrollable. As a result, pressure will rise. Not in an outward manner. Internally. Subtle, persistent endeavors to undermine your position. You may observe thoughts that appear to be your own, yet they are burdened with an unusual significance. There were voices that suggested it was a matter of luck, that it could have been accomplished by anyone, that it was not as significant as it appeared, that you are exaggerating the events that occurred. These whispers are not accurate. The enemy accuses day and night, as Scripture once cautioned. When direct opposition is unsuccessful, doubt is the preferred weapon. This is the manner in which you respond. You refrain from engaging in arguments. You recall. Recall each instance in which you were on the brink of quitting but ultimately persevered. Each night, you wept in solitude. Each step you took without any applause. Each battle that you survived without any witnesses. Those memories are not indicative of weakness. They are armor. The actions that were taken in isolation cannot be undone by any voice. A victory that was achieved without assistance can be undone by no accusation. The ground that you have acquired through endurance is not abandoned. You're situated within it. Additionally, the uncertainty is eliminated through the act of standing. This is due to the fact that what was achieved independently cannot be taken by anyone. There is one additional truth that you must comprehend regarding the current situation. The isolation you experienced was not merely a test. It was a result of formation. It instructed you in the most uncommon strength that a chosen individual can possess: spiritual autonomy. Crowds are no longer necessary to verify your identity. You are no longer reliant on applause to advance. In the most challenging classroom environment conceivable, you acquired an understanding of your value. Complete seclusion. Continuously exerting pressure. No eyewitnesses. No amount of praise could ever accomplish what that type of soil can. As stated in the Bible, "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want." You experienced that truth prior to identifying it. You discovered that you could endure without an external source of energy. This is the point at which leadership is initiated. Those who require constant validation become irritated by criticism. However, those who were created independently and have acquired the ability to endure without external validation are impervious to destruction. They are unyielding in their stance. They remain intact in the face of rejection. You unwittingly evolved into that type of leader. You are no longer susceptible to social dismissal, as you have already endured complete exclusion and emerged unscathed. The worst-case scenario was encountered by you, standing alone in the face of the impossibility. Additionally, you refrained from retreating. It is now clear to you that nothing that lies ahead can undo you. You have already confronted and surmounted your most profound apprehension. You did not merely endure it. You exercised authority over it. Consequently, the forthcoming events will necessitate the strength you currently possess. An invitation will be received within 3 months. Its origin will remain unknown to you. You will not comprehend the rationale behind your selection. However, it will provide a gateway through which all of the knowledge you have acquired in isolation will suddenly become comprehensible. The abilities you acquired without the guidance of mentors. Strength that is developed without assistance. The knowledge acquired without guidance. What was once perceived as abandonment will be revealed as meticulous preparation. A moment of impossible alignment will occur within 6 months. A gathering. A message. A piece of information that arrives at the precise moment you require it. It will be so precise that coincidence cannot account for it. As the Bible once stated, He makes everything beautiful in its time. You will observe that the timing is not delayed. It is intended to provide assistance. The most challenging test will occur within 9 months. Not a struggle, but a state of comfort. The inclination to cease expansion. To become comfortable with the accomplishments you have already achieved. To put it simply, this is sufficient. There are numerous individuals who are selected to reside here. They retire inwardly after achieving victory independently. They conflate survival with completion. However, the purpose for which you were created extends beyond mere personal triumph. The urge to remain secure will be palpable. In order to safeguard the tranquility that you have acquired through pain, refusing that urge will result in a loss of tranquility. It will prompt you to re-enter the risk zone once security has actually arrived, making the decision to prioritize growth over rest. However, if you persist in your efforts to advance when it would be more convenient to halt, multiplication will commence within 12 months. The reward of a single victory with a minor increase is not given by God. The Bible demonstrates that those who are faithful with a small amount are entrusted with a great deal. The foundation was the work you completed independently. Expansion is the subsequent step, not an addition. Multiplication. Then, within a year, some of those who have departed will attempt to join you again. Explanations will accompany them. For the following reasons. Regrettably. Finally, this is the quietest examination. Forgive them without re-establishing previous access. Bitterness is alleviated through forgiveness. However, wisdom retains the lessons that absence imparts. Some individuals may return in new capacities. Others are required to remain outside. You will be able to discern the distinction. Your discernment was enhanced by solitude. Your perception was enhanced by betrayal. You are now making your decision not out of pain, but rather out of clarity. This is not the conclusion of the journey. This is the moment at which all activity commences. As the chosen one, listen to this as the truth, not as solace. Your suffering was never arbitrary. Failure was never the result of your collapse. The nights you believed you were breaking were not indicators of weakness. Rather, they were evidence of a strength that could only be revealed under such a high level of pressure. The very thing that was intended to crush you was ultimately evidence that something divine was already at work within you. Scripture once stated, "We are pressed on every side, but not crushed." And you lived for that long before you comprehended it. You were being revealed, not destroyed. You were being marked by each moment you believed you were losing. Your endurance is being assessed. I am recognizing your authority, marking you for a form of greatness that is not easily inherited, replicated, or acquired at a low cost. The fire was the evidence, and you were not spared. You were not rescued at an early stage because the process of formation in you necessitated complete exposure to the weight. You are not currently being directed to be soothed. You are being summoned, awakened, enabled. The object that is approaching you is neither diminutive nor gentle. The hand that has been sculpting you did not do so in order to rest, but rather to move. Not for the sake of applause, but for the sake of effect. Not to ensure your safety, but to enhance your efficiency. Do not be deceived by the current tranquility. Unveiling frequently precedes silence. The suffering you have endured has already been heard in realms beyond your sight. Your survival has already initiated events that will soon take on a visible form. And when they do, you will comprehend the necessity of the situation. The reason you were compelled to walk it alone. The reasons why it is impossible to expedite any process. You are not late. You are not overlooked. You have not yet completed the task. You are being guided toward an entity that does not manifest itself immediately. Something that does not provide a predetermined explanation. A threshold has been recently breached. Not yet closed. Entrance. And the full form of what awaits on the other side has not yet been revealed. You observed what no one acknowledged, God of concealed battles and unseen victories. In silence, you tallied each stride you took, each decision that is rendered without the presence of witnesses. Integrity was prioritized over convenience at all times. I am not seeking to be spared, Rather, I am seeking to be aligned. Allow what was created in solitude to now progress with purpose. Be cautious of what you have roused. Strengthen the information you have disclosed. Eliminate any elements that are no longer appropriate for the entity you have created in the dark. I refrain from soliciting consolation. I request precision. I do not request simplicity. I request that you be prepared. Seal doors that are required to close. Illuminate the areas where paths must be opened. Allow courage to emerge more rapidly than fear. Doubt is drowned out by obedience, and the truth persists when the noise subsides. Bring forward in power what you have secretly marked. At the time you have appointed, I stand. Not yet completed. Unafraid. Not turning back. One that has been selected. If this message spoke to you, if it lifted you, if it awakened something deep within you, your response matters more than you realize. Take a moment to go to the comments and write 999 or 777. Also, share your city and where you're listening from. Let this be a quiet declaration of alignment and agreement with what is unfolding in your life right now. If you haven't yet, subscribe and stay connected not just to a channel, but to a growing community of faith. As we're moving toward 20,000 subscribers, your presence helps ensure this message continues reaching hearts that are ready in this moment. And to those who feel led to partner in this mission through your comments or by using the Super Thanks feature, thank you. No contribution is insignificant. Even the smallest act of support can carry hope to someone who needs it. Your support helps this message travel far beyond what any of us could do alone. Thank you for choosing to stand in this moment. Your purity is protected. Your morale is improving. Your destiny is being revealed. And you are not alone. What if the reason this message unsettled you is because the next move is no longer optional? I concur.